Hi there. So I'm back, and we now get into the federal provincial distribution of powers. We go right up to Section 90. Sections 90 to 95 deal with federal provincial relations and distributions of power. Section 90, take a look at that. This is really important. I won't read it, but you read it. Section 90 is a power of reservation and disallowance again. And now under Section 90, the systems of reservation and disallowance that we saw in sections 55, 56, 57, the relationship between the federal parliament and the British government, you now see the same power relations coming between the provinces, provincial governments, provincial legislatures, and the federal government. Whereas the British government has the power to reserve and disallow Canadian legislation in sections 55, 56, 57, now you see that the federal government has the power to reserve and disallow any provincial act, that the lieutenant governor, a federal appointee, has the power to reserve provincial legislation for review, signification of pleasure and review by the governor general. Now, you know, the governor general with responsible government means the federal government, the federal cabinet, the federal prime minister. So just as the British government has the power to reserve and disallow Canadian legislation, now you see that the federal government has the power to reserve and disallow provincial legislation. It's interesting that this federal power of disallowance, as it's known, was used many times in the early years after Confederation. Between 1867 and 1896, 68 provincial laws were disallowed, largely by the Macdonald government. That's roughly two a year. And these would be dealing with matters of economic development in the country. And the federal government believing the provincial governments were interfering with federal economic development issues. So the federal government was disallowing provincial laws. In the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, this federal power of disallowance became less and less used, fell into disuse, as Russell says. The last two times it was attempted, 1944 in Saskatchewan and 1961 also in Saskatchewan, where it was CCF, proto NDP type governments, and the liberally appointed lieutenant governor seeking to disallow, and then Mackenzie King, first time Mackenzie King in 1944, second time uh, Diefenbaker, federal conservative prime minister, were shocked that the lieutenant governor was moving to disallow. And the prime minister ordered the lieutenant governor to sign the provincial law into give royal assent to the provincial act. But again, appreciate it still in the books here today. This has not been removed. Technically, the federal government still has the power to reserve and disallow any provincial law. Why that doesn't happen more often now, we will take a look at that when we look at constitutional conventions. Now you move on, sections 91 and 92 are the two key big sections in the Constitution Act of 1867. Section 91 deals with federal powers, the powers of the federal government. Section 92 deals with the powers of provincial governments. So you see in section 91 in the preamble, there's that line that the federal government has, the Senate and House of Commons have the power to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Canada. That's where we get that famous line, peace, order, and good government. That whereas the American Constitution is all about life, liberty, and security, life, liberty, and happiness, the pursuit of happiness, in Canada, the fundamental role of the federal government is to promote peace, order, and good government. Section 91, you see in that preamble, the listing of provisions, the 29 points listed are not absolute, that these are simply examples of federal power, and that nothing in Section 91 is that nothing is not to none of this here is not to restrict the generality of the foregoing. So there are 29 powers, there could be more. And what you see when you look at that list of powers, very much you're seeing a list of powers that John A. Macdonald and the Fathers of Confederation thought would be important to the federal government to have a strong central federal government. So you see the federal government has power over public debt and property, regulation of trade and commerce, unemployment insurance, raising of money by any form of taxation the federal government has. Public credit, a postal service, the post office is a federal responsibility, census, militia, military, naval service, so national defense is a federal responsibility, navigation and shipping, seacoast and internal inland fisheries, banking, incorporation of banks, the issuance of paper money, weights and measures, bills of exchange, interest rates are set by the federal government, legal tender, bankruptcy, Indians and lands reserved for Indians, naturalization and aliens, so immigration, federal, shared federal, provincial, marriage and divorce, criminal law, all criminal law is a federal responsibility. And then at the very end of section 29, any matter that comes within this area is considered by definition not to go to the provinces. So to Macdonald, these are the key important economic powers that the federal government needs. So section 92 is the provincial powers, and these are absolutely restricted. The 16 powers listed here in section 92 are the only powers the provinces have. And some of these are significant, of course. Direct taxation. The provinces have the power of direct taxation. I don't want to get into a discussion here about the difference between direct and indirect taxation. You Google that. Google the difference. There is a big difference. Indirect taxation can be on anything. Direct taxation is much more limited. So the provinces have a more limited taxing power. The 92.5 public lands, management and sale of public lands, 92.6 maintenance of reformatory prisons within the provinces, 92.7 management of hospitals, 92.7 so healthcare from here, healthcare becomes a provincial responsibility. Municipal institutions, local governments are established by provinces. Shops and saloons, 92.10, take a look at 92.10. This is actually a federal power. Provinces have local works and undertakings other than this following list. Communications between provinces and other countries, steamships, railways, canals. And then 92.10C, such works as, although wholly situate within the province, are before or after their execution declared by the Parliament of Canada to be for the general advantage of Canada or the advantage of two or more provinces. The federal government has the power to take over any public works that they believe to be for the advantage of Canada. The federal government did this with nuclear power post 1945. So nuclear energy is a federal responsibility. And there's been some talk that could the federal government take over pipelines, oil pipelines, and compel provinces to have oil pipelines built through them. So 92.10C still comes up in debate at times, whether the federal government should be taking over certain public works for the advantage of all of Canada. Solemnization of marriage as a provincial responsibility, property and civil rights in the province, the administration of justice, generally any local matter. So provinces have limited but still significant powers. And then, as we'll see, health, education, welfare all come through the provincial powers, but the federal government has been given major powers over international affairs, national defense, and economic development nationwide. We'll come back and finish off the federal provincial distribution of powers in the next video.